Hi, I'm a higher ed CMO, and I have a confession to make. Working with enrollment management on recruiting a class is one of the highlights of my job. And today we're going to talk to the person that I am partners with in this endeavor. Welcome to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, the podcast designed for higher education marketers. I'm your host, Jaime Hunt, and I am so excited to have this opportunity to share insights and inspiration. With Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, I'm designing a different kind of podcasting experience. With each episode, I'll be bringing in a guest for a deep dive into the challenges and joys we all face in higher education marketing. After each episode, you can join the conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag HigherEdCMO. I would love to see this become like a book club, but for a podcast. And be sure to follow me on Twitter at JamieHuntIMC, that's JamieHuntIMC, for more opportunities to connect. I am so excited to be here with my friend and colleague, Brent Shock, who is the Vice President for Enrollment Management and Student Success at Miami University. Hey, Brent.
Hey, Jamie. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
It's so great to have you on the show. You're one of my favorite people in the world and one of my favorite colleagues ever. So I'm glad to have you. So Brent and I work really closely together on enrollment marketing communications. University Communications and Marketing works really closely with enrollment management and student success to help their team and the admission team hit our class every year, which has been a fabulous partnership between the two of us. But first, I want to start by asking you, Brent, what is your higher ed journey?
Yeah, well, it's like probably everyone else's. It's interesting, but it's also somewhat boring, I think. So let me start there. So my higher ed journey started 3 weeks after I graduated from Miami University. And it started actually at Miami University, and that's where I am today. It started when a friend of mine, his sister called and said, there's a job open in the financial aid office. It's a temporary job, 3 weeks. Are you interested? And I just graduated, did not have a job. And I thought, sure, it'll show that I'm not interested in having a gap on my resume. So I went to work in the financial aid office, and my first responsibility was to do something called bubbling Pell. And at that time, and this is 1992, September of 1992, at that time, when students completed the free application for federal student aid, or the FAFSA, they received an output document called the student aid report. It was a paper paper document, 4 or 5 pages long. And those students that were Pell eligible had to submit the last page that contained information about them. And on the back of that page was information that each financial aid office had to literally scantron circle in with a number 2 pencil. So I spent 3 weeks circling in names and amounts of Pell that the student was eligible for, which then were bundled up, tabulated on an old style tape calculator, and then we would put them in the mail, ship them to the U.S. Department of Education, who would then in turn cut a paper check and send to Miami University, who would then take the paper check and one by one key it into each student's account to show that they had received the federal Pell Grant. It was not exciting work, but I did not have a job. After 3 weeks of that, it got extended. I did some other work in the office, and eventually I started as a counselor. I was hired as a counselor full-time about maybe 2 months after the temporary gig. And then I had the good fortune of moving around the office. Probably every 3 to 4 years, something about my job changed. I moved into the systems area. I helped implement the direct lending program at Miami University. We were one of the early adopters right after President Clinton put that in place. We were in the second year of the program, actually, so we're really early adopters. I worked in that for a few years. I worked in systems. I helped implement our current system, Banner, and then just had the opportunity to literally work around the office. And as I always say, you hang around too long, and eventually you become director. From there, I had the opportunity to work overseeing the financial aid office, the bursar's office, and the One Stop. And as Miami stood up its first enrollment management division, picked up student success along the way, working on retention, chairing a retention committee with two of my colleagues, and then eventually worked into becoming interim vice president, and then finally vice president. So 30 years, I've just coming up on 30 years this September in higher ed, and all of it at Miami University.
That is tremendous. That I feel like in a lot of ways we've had the opposite higher ed journey. I've been at 5 institutions and you've staked your claim here at Miami, but we're so lucky that you have, I think. You've made a big mark here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
So let's talk a little bit about how we work together. How would you describe our partnership?
Well, not long after you started, I think we had a conversation that I said we're sort of joined at the hip. And I said to you, I remember the conversation that something like this. I said, my success is your success and your success is my success. And that was true then, almost 2 years ago. It is certainly truer today. We work hand in hand. The backstory is that there were 5 positions in enrollment management that were moved over to University Communication in September of 2019, and I supported that. I thought that was a very good idea. It didn't make sense to have rogue communicators out from underneath the umbrella of University Communications and Marketing, and that honestly, I think was an important moment in the lives of our 2 divisions. So I think that's part of why we work so well together. The other part of it is that honestly we need your expertise to market the university and help understand our brand, help the campus understand our brand, so that we all become brand ambassadors, brand stewards who can articulately, in a matter of a quick elevator speech, 30 seconds, explain the what's unique about Miami University in a landscape in which many institutions are saying the same things about themselves repeatedly. And so that's not expertise that really fits in enrollment management. I know that in some enrollment management shops there are marketing pieces, but I don't feel like that makes sense here at Miami. And I'm very glad that you have that under your portfolio. And I have grown to love your team. And I say grown, that doesn't mean that I came from not loving your team. It means that I didn't know them, and I've had the opportunity to get to know them. And there is no finer, in my opinion, Chief Marketing Officer than Jaime Hunt. And it's fun to work with you. The projects that we work on are mostly fun. A lot of them are fun, not all of them, but most of them are fun. And I can confidently put my head on my pillow at night knowing that you have that under your control and I'm not worried about it. And so I'm very fortunate that we have the relationship that we have.
I think it is outstanding and also a little bit unique in higher ed. I have so many of my counterparts who don't get along with your counterparts or who have tension between those relationships and sort of battles for power. And what I love about working with you is that our expertise isn't questioned, but you bring something to the table that helps us be better at our jobs. So it's not like I'm questioning your expertise by bringing suggestions and feedback. It's we're working collectively to make a stronger outcome. And I think that's a good first step towards that.
Yep, I agree.
Why do you think it's important to try to have this type of relationship between communications and admission? And I think you alluded a little bit to our success is your success and vice versa, but what other ways do you think it's important?
Yeah, well, I think that first of all, I'm a big believer in the importance of reaching across office divisions and collaborating. I don't believe that in this market for higher ed that you have the time, the bandwidth, or the resources to do anything but that. If you're expending energy on second guessing each other, if you're expending energy and resources on questioning what the other person, what the other office, what the other division is doing, you're taking energy and resources from, frankly, bigger problems and issues that you're facing. I mean, it is tough to be in higher education right now, in the business of higher education. We all know about the shrinking and changing demographics. We know about how COVID has upset the norms. We know that there are changing issues, changing rules around from NACAC. And in many ways, we're still understanding how COVID has impacted us and will be, I think, for quite some time in our students and in the recruiting of our students. And so if you're expending energy on anything but collaborating, then I think you're just you're hurting yourself and you're hurting your institution. You're leaving valuable resources and wasting valuable resources in the process of doing that. So I think for those reasons, it's really important that the two divisions collaborate and work together. And it's not all roses and apple pie. We certainly have moments where we think, well, maybe we should think about this, and no, maybe we should think about that. But we're able to always work through it and come to a collaborative moment and make a decision and go forward. And it's just when you do that for a little bit, then it builds trust. And so the next time you come to me and say, I don't think that that's something that we want to do, I can say, okay, I trust you. I trust where you're headed, and I'll stand back and let you lead this whatever it is forward.
Hey all, I hope you're enjoying this episode of Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO. I want to take just a quick moment to thank my friends at Nectar who made this new Enrollify podcast possible. Nectar brings affordable communications infrastructure to college campuses. It's like Slack, but for the higher ed student experience. Nectar integrates seamlessly with all major LMSs, making it easy for instructors and administrators to build emergent learning communities in all of their classes and groups without the extra work. Their focus is on boosting student engagement and reducing instructor stress by building a learning community in every classroom. By leveraging familiar technology like instant messaging channels, Nectar prepares students for the remote yet collaborative work environment of the future. You can learn more about their platform by heading on over to Nectar, that's nectir.io, and be sure to tell the team that Jaime sent you their way. I talk a lot about collaboration taking muscle memory, and I think you kind of just alluded to that. It's like the more you collaborate, the easier it gets, and the more you start to crave that collaboration. Like, I wouldn't want to do anything, put anything really out into the marketplace without getting your read on it for a number of reasons, but not the least of which being that we're sort of, we rise and fall together. If you don't hit NTR, I also haven't done my job. So it's really, really important for us to kind of have that trust and respect for each other. And yes. I certainly have that. And I'm not exactly sure. I feel like we just started off on the right foot. So I don't know how to give people advice if you're like already on the wrong foot. How do you get onto the right foot? But do you have any ideas for that?
Yeah, I think so. I do think a very nice person and very warm and engaging. And I think you sometimes also just need to say, look, this isn't going well. Can we sit down and have a conversation about this? That hasn't always been the case here at the university. Marketing and enrollment have not always seen eye to eye. And there have been certain periods of the relationship prior to both of us that were maybe a little bit more acrimonious. But I just think that it takes two people who say, look, we know we have to row in the same direction. I care deeply about our students. I care deeply about the results. I know you and your team care deeply about our students. I know you and your team deeply care about the results. And so when you start with the common ground and you identify that common ground, and then you say, look, let's start here and let's build, then you go. I think prior to COVID, there was some shifts in how people built relationships at work that weren't necessarily good. I was seeing, in my career, 20 years ago, people would often go to lunch together, and a lot of work would happen at lunch. Some of that relationship building would happen with food and a meal involved, in which the guards are down and people see the true self sometimes. And that was shifting already, and I think COVID further hurt that piece. And I would say, don't be afraid of the let's go get lunch or let's go get ice cream, and just sit down and maybe not even talk about work, but just work at getting to know one another. Once you know somebody and you see who they are and you know what they're after, it's so much easier to come alongside and say, let's partner on this, let's figure this out. What do you think? How do we move this forward? And that would be the best advice I have, would be to work at the relationship and do it in some of the quote unquote old fashioned ways.
I think that is really good advice. While you were talking, I was kind of reminded of an experience that I had when I was at my last institution, where somebody who had sort of chafed at the brand guidelines, and I'm putting that really nicely. We did not have a positive relationship. Ultimately ended up reporting to me, and he came into my office and he was so nervous, and I stuck out my hand and I said, "Hi, I'm Jaime Hunt. It's nice to meet you." And he was like, "What are you talking about?" And I was like, "We're starting on a brand new page today. We're everything that's happened between us in the past is gone, and we're starting on a new page." And he became someone who actually has come through Ohio. We haven't been able to sync up visiting, but like we're still in contact, and still I consider him a friend. And so there's something to be said for that. Like, let's just start on a new page. Can we agree that we're going to start fresh today? So that might be one way if you have a contentious relationship.
That's really excellent advice. And I'm assuming anybody on the receiving end of that would be immediately disarmed and would be like, okay, this person's for real. Let me take note and let's do something different. So that's great.
Think so. I think it kind of made him say, wait a second. Okay, we're having a true fresh start. So I think that was important.
Yeah.
What do you think the risks are of not collaborating the way we do?
Yeah, I think definitely you're at risk of wasting resources, wasting financial resources. I think you're at risk of wasting time resources, energy resources. I mean, I think I've been reminded in the during and through the pandemic that one of the resources that we have is our own personal energy, and you only have so much of that per day. And if you're spending it unwisely on acrimony or questioning or approaching people from a negative space, then you are wasting resources that you just only have a finite amount of. So I think that's number one. I think you're certainly the place you go to next is you're at risk of failing to meet your goals. And I don't know any institution that can afford that right now, that there are so many headwinds coming at higher education. There are still so many unknowns that the risk of already, even if you're executing flawlessly and rowing in the same direction, there's still tremendous risk about not meeting goals. You really cannot have anything at you, any further headwinds at you. And by not working closely together, you just put one more obstacle, one more headwind in your way. And so I think that's the chief risk that I see.
On the UCM side, one of the things that we have put in place that I think comes from this relationship that we have is having areas that maybe don't intersect with admission, thinking about admission in their work. And I'll give an example of our PR, media relations arm, really syncing up their editorial calendar around hitting those key moments in the admission cycle. So hitting the application deadlines and making sure that we're flooding the marketplace with PR, the great things that Miami's doing, and then repeating that during that month before the deposit deadline. And so I think that for the CMOs listening, I think that if you can start to think about spreading that admissions calendar more widely, so it's not just in the framework of your enrollment marketing team, you can help the institution achieve its enrollment goals. And I think that's going to be even more important as we face some of the headwinds that we're against right now.
Yeah, that's so great. It's so great. And thank you for spearheading that here at Miami. I 100% agree with that there are so many different ways that you can dovetail the messages together. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I just think there's, like you said, your success is our success and vice versa. We have to bring in a class to pay our bills, to be perfectly honest,
yes.
To be perfectly blunt. Why do you think that sometimes there is tension in the relationship between the CMO and the chief enrollment officer?
Yeah, I think that there sometimes is a bit of a division between boots on the ground and people that are the generals that are back at headquarters. I think sometimes our mission counselors are out on the road and they're hearing things from families that maybe aren't on our radars, but it's maybe a perception that's out there, or maybe there's just something in the environment that's confounding the message. And I think sometimes if you carry that back, it's perceived as, well, you're just enrollment. You don't know what you're talking about. Like this brand has been tested, or this thing has been tested. So I think that there are forces at work that can make that a little bit worse. Honestly, enrollment people. I mean, I know that there are some enrollment people that come from a background of marketing, but by and large, they come from admissions backgrounds, or increasingly a little bit more financial aid backgrounds. And so we're not the expert, but we do see, we have, because we're out in the field, we have a chance to see how other institutions are marketing themselves, and sometimes very specific ways. And so that sometimes informs the information that we bring back. And so I think that maybe sometimes that there's just this fact that those closest to the message receivers are sometimes perceiving some things that aren't going well or are going great, and maybe it's just not always well received when you bring it back. And so I think that's part of it. I think that enrollment managers know that they have a lot on their plate in terms of the goals, and a lot of responsibility that comes with that. And I think that sometimes it probably makes them nervous that there's this whole thing over here called marketing and communications that they can't control, and their destiny is maybe tied to that piece. But to me, the more people you have at it, with the broader diversity of backgrounds, the better off you are. And that's how I really view the role of university communications and marketing, is that they've got the expertise and they know what works and what doesn't. And we can just inform on the other side when we see something, or we hear something, or we see that school XYZ is doing this, and maybe we need to change our messaging or come at our messaging a little bit different for that reason. So I think it's a little bit of that. I think sometimes it's, on the enrollment side, it's probably ego for that reason, and probably a self-preservation worry. But I at the end of the day, I think that thinking is limiting. It limits creativity. I think it limits collaboration for sure. And I think it will in the end hurt an institution if their leaders are thinking in that way, in that sort of self-preservationist way.
Yeah, I think you brought up some really good points. And I think the idea of, on the CMO side, I think there's a lot of ego there too. Like, we know better than you. But at the end of the day, you're right. You're having those day-to-day interactions with the people that we're trying to move. And there's no better feedback than the feedback that we get from admissions reps. You're talking to the audience we're trying to reach on a daily basis. So I see it, I think some of my peers sometimes see it as a one-way relationship, like we're serving your office by doing the advertising, but really you're serving us, well, one, by bringing in a class that pays the bills, but also by giving us that insight. And I think it's important to make sure that we have opportunities to collect that insight from your admissions team. And here at Miami, I and two of my senior directors meet every week with the AVP of admission to get some, like, she's telling us constantly what's working, what's not, what messaging she thinks we need to tweak, and that sort of thing. It's very collaborative.
Yeah, and we have natural, back and forth about, do we try this email for app generation strategy? What does that, how would the market perceive that? And, I think it's been interesting because I can see in those meetings and the meetings that you and I are in, how that forms the final product. And you take, 100% of the good things that UCM brings, and you add in the whatever percent EMSS brings, and it just comes out a stronger product. And I think that's what makes the collaboration also so very fun.
I love that. So, Brent, walk me through an oh crap moment, a time when you thought this is going to crash and burn. What was happening and how did you push through that?
I don't know what you're talking about. Oh gosh. Okay, so there are a few. I mean, we've all had them, of course. I mean, the pandemic would be one. I'll spare us all and just leave that one sitting over here on its side to go away and never bother us again. I think last year was a watershed year. I think so recruiting for the fall of 21 class, I think in many respects for me was sort of that year. We couldn't do the things that we would normally do. We couldn't go to high schools. We couldn't have lots of visitors on campus. We weren't sure about the interplay of the importance of financial aid. We knew it'd be very important. We just weren't sure how important it would be. And as a result, we were generous to families. And so, we knew that we were going to have a larger class and also spend more scholarship dollars than we really would have liked. And so for me, that was sort of that oh crap moment. But it was a series of smaller decisions and oh crap moments throughout the year that led up to that outcome. And I'm glad we did what we did. But it was a hard year because everything that you have known about the traditional recruitment cycle was just gone. And you finished out that way in 20, but for most of 20, we were largely done with a lot of our key initiatives by the time we hit mid-March of 2020. That was not true for last year. And so it was just a series of what next, and constant pivoting and constant recalibration. And I don't function well or very long, as most people don't, in crisis mode. And I wouldn't call it full-blown crisis. It certainly felt like with everything that we just didn't know, that we were kind of constantly building the plane as we were going. And that is not a way for me to work for very long, and it's not a way for anyone to lead through for very long.
No, those were certainly really challenging times, and it probably didn't help that you had a brand new CMO in that seat too.
Every day I went to bed and said, "Why is Jaime so new?" I didn't think that. Actually, I never thought about that way. Actually, at all, not at all.
But I had to get up to speed pretty quickly. But we both have such talented teams that makes such a difference. So, Brent, if you got a $10 million boost to your budget, how would you spend it?
That is a great question. I would spend some time I spend some resources on I'd start with some additional staff development. So we've had a lot of turnover, as most institutions have. And I think that one of the ways to counterbalance this great resignation period that we're in is to not only throw maybe additional financial dollars at staff to entice them to stay, but is to invest in them in other ways. Spend time with them, spend time building into them, spend time bringing in some resources to build into them. So I would think about that. I would certainly think about some of our strategies. I think about the top of our funnel, and is there something that we'd want to do differently there to get more, sort of more eyeballs on the institution. I would certainly come to you and say to the marketing team and say, look, we have this. Where can we most move the dial? What would make the most sense, and put some of it up that. I would build long term, like you and your team have done. I would think about, not just think about earlier than juniors. I think about sophomores, freshmen, and maybe even eighth graders. I would be thinking about ways to build future pipelines into the university. And then I'd lastly ask the question is, I think that sometimes institutions are over-reliant on the first-year class for the revenue that they need. And I'd spend some time thinking through, are there other revenue generation ideas that we could maybe seed from this money to bring down the reliance on first-year net tuition revenue, to give the enrollment team a little bit of a breathing space to then build long term. That's how I think I would think about it.
I think we should just send this podcast to our CFO and see if that will convince him to give us $10 million.
I think that's a great idea. I think you should do it. I think you should do it, Jaime.
Dr. Kramer, I hope you're listening. Give us $10 million. So, Brent, I'm going to laugh if he actually does listen to this podcast on a regular basis and then reaches out after this.
Yeah.
So, Brent, what are you most challenged by looking at the next couple of years?
I certainly feel like there is so much that we still don't know. I feel like so quite candidly, I feel like the pandemic has shaped us as individuals and us as a society and high school students as well. They're part of our society in ways that we just don't understand yet. And I think it's making us make choices today that are very different than the choices we would have made in 2019. I think we're seeing that in students and how they are thinking about college. We know that there are some students that are not thinking about college, and we know that there are some students in maybe in places where it's underserved, and the resources aren't there to help them think about college. So I think that is one thing that I worry about a lot. It's not something that I can control, but to the extent that we can get our hands around the trends and the shifts, to try and stay ahead of it, I think is going to be really important. And I worry a lot about families, and we know that from families that they are really concerned about the cost of college. I know that that's going to continue to put pressure on institutions to think about pricing and aid policies and structures, and that is, I think, going to be for a foreseeable future a piece that stays with us. And then I think higher ed has lost, or ceded, I should say, not lost, ceded the argument around, is college worth it? What is the ROI of college? Is it worth it? We've ceded that to select media sources, and we've not done a good job collectively coming out and saying we know that a higher education degree is worth it, and here's why you should consider it. And I worry about that being a lasting change for maybe a generation, I don't know, folks that are just saying it's too expensive and not worth it, therefore I'm not going. And certainly right now, when you have a white-hot labor market and there are options and positions galore, I think that it's easier for people to come to that landing space. So I think those are a few things that kind of keep me up thinking. They're big things. I have lots of other concerns, obviously, but those are the things that I've been thinking about more as we think about next year.
Hey, all, Zach here from Enrollify. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. Our shows feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Mickey Baines, Jeremy Tears, Jamie Hunt, Corinne Myers, Jamie Gleason, and many, many more. You can learn more about the Enrollify Podcast Network at podcasts.enrollify.org. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea. Find yours at podcasts.enrollify.org.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot to keep in mind, and I do worry about the students and the high school students and the impact of COVID on them, and then longer term, the impacts of COVID on even kids who are in elementary school right now and the foundation of their education and where that is. So there's a lot of uncertainty, which I think makes it incredibly important to be all in it together versus sort of everybody pulling in their own way. And one of the things I love about Miami is that our president is very much about transdisciplinary connections and breaking down silos.
Absolutely.
And I knew when I interviewed with him, I was like, this is a guy that will let me get on my silo soapbox and appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Awesome. So, Brent, what is one thing about this field that almost no one agrees with you about?
Let me tell you one thing that I think is important in this field, and then you can tell me if I've answered the question or not. So I'm going to speak to my friends who are in the financial aid profession listening to this podcast. So there aren't a lot of former reformed financial aid professionals in this field, and I think there should be more. Previously, I had the opportunity to work for several years with the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. And I was on the ground level of helping stand up a couple of conferences that helped financial aid professionals begin to see themselves as possible candidates for enrollment management positions. And I think that there has been, I think the tide is turning, but I think there's been a little bit of a reluctance to see financial aid folks in this field because we don't have the same level of understanding in terms of the traditional admission model. But we bring other things to the table, not the least of which is usually a deep understanding of how aid works and how aid moves families, how scholarships move families. And sometimes I think we're just outside the profession enough, the admission profession enough, that we can then ask other questions, ask sometimes good questions, probably sometimes not so great questions, that maybe help other folks in the admission arena think about what they're doing or inform them of something that they should maybe think about doing differently or not doing at all. So I don't know if it's in a case of agree or disagree, but I feel strongly that in this field of enrollment management that there is a space for the financial aid office to 100% should be at the table, should 100% be part of planning and making the class, and one should be in the room when decisions are being made about how do you where do we spend money on X, Y, and Z, and how do we move here, and what's our strategies here. That all is really important. And I also would say that no doubt in my mind that there are skilled financial aid professionals out there that should consider enrollment management as a potential field. Once you reach director of financial aid, you're kind of topped out. There are some other opportunities that you can do. You can build your portfolio by adding other offices. But this is a viable way to keep yourself growing and a way to further your career. And honestly, I think the institutions could benefit from a few more of us in there. I'd like to believe that my financial aid knowledge makes up for my lack of admission knowledge, and I have a really strong AVP of admission. And so together, it's an interesting partnership.
I think there's something to be said about hiring people that fill in the gaps of your own expertise. And I like to call some of the folks in my office as being my Lego, like where I'm strong, maybe they aren't as strong, but where I'm weak, they fill that right in for me.
Jaime, I think it's a great hallmark of what makes you a great leader is that you're not put off or threatened by that. And I've worked with plenty of people over the years that are sometimes threatened by the fact that they don't know it all. Or that they feel like that if they hire a really strong number two, that it will somehow diminish their presence or hurt their career potential on campus. And I don't buy that at all.
No, and I think I've learned a valuable lesson about succession planning, because a lot of times if you haven't done that, all that you have worked for during your time at an institution can be gone when somebody with a different perspective and a different philosophy comes in. And I've mentioned on this podcast before that CMOs are often guilty of, I'm going to come in and scrap everything. And if you do some really strong succession planning, you're more building upon what's been done instead of just burning to the ground what existed before. So I'm going to switch up this last question a little bit, Brent, but what piece of advice would you give to a CMO about working with an enrollment management office?
It's not going to be rocket science here. So I would say first, get to know them. They may be feeling like they have a tremendous burden on their shoulders, that they have to carry the institution in ways that other people don't. And so try to get to know them and maybe understand that a little bit, because sometimes people operate out of that. Not that it's healthy to do that, but sometimes people do operate out of that. So I would say try to walk the proverbial mile with them a little bit just to see to help understand that. I would say work on the collaboration piece. Go to lunch, get to know one another, spend time outside the office if you can do that a little bit to get to know each other. I think that's really, really important. I think stand your ground when appropriate. I think you are the experts when it comes to brand and how to position the university. And so I think that certainly enrollment folks can have ideas about that and can maybe give you ideas to help shape that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, that's your responsibility. And much the same way that bringing in the class is ultimately, I know it takes a university to recruit a class, but if there's somebody that has to be held responsible for what happens or doesn't happen with the class, it's usually the enrollment person, the VP of enrollment. So I think that, understanding your two roles and that you both carry a lot of weight, I think is really important as well. And by weight, I mean burden. You're carrying a burden. And so to the extent that you can understand each other's burden a little bit, I think that is going to be important. I think, anything that a communication or CMO can do to help people on campus, help the admission effort, and help their own staff understand, the generation that we're working with, which is, largely coming to light as we're working with it, is really important. I think that takes both divisions working together to make that happen. But I think that is really important. And I think those are a few pieces of advice that I would throw out.
That is great. And I guess I would say for the enrollment management people looking to work with their CMO.
Yes, please turn the tables.
I think if you're the one that needs to hand out that olive branch, if you've had a contentious relationship and take that step, I think it's helpful to acknowledge that the marketing team is the source of marketing expertise in the office. But if you're dealing with someone who maybe has wants to feel more ownership and maybe has ego wrapped into what they're doing, I think it can be helpful to position it as, this is how I think I can help you if we partner together, and bringing to the table, like what you said about the admissions counselors can be giving you some insight on how this is landing and stuff like that. But I'm really so pleased. I knew when I interviewed with you and when I interviewed with the other PEC at Miami that this was going to be a great place to work, and I was not wrong. It's been fantastic. And I really value our partnership, and I want it to be cloned at universities across the country, except those with which we compete. I hope you guys continue to have dysfunctional relationships.
That's right. Very acrimonious.
Yes.
Very acrimonious. The more acrimony, the better.
Yeah. If you're at any of those schools, please just fight with each other all you want. So Brent, where can people find you if they listen to this podcast and want to connect with you?
So this is why I'm not in marketing. I'm not really. I do have a Facebook account, but I haven't been in months. I am on Twitter. You can find me at Shock, SHOCKBL, Shock BL, B as in boy, L as in Lane, on Twitter. But I am more of a follower than I am a poster, so you won't find a lot of me there. But you're welcome to reach out and contact me that way. That would be perfectly fine. I do check Twitter. Every day. That would be the best place to find me, I think.
Awesome. Well, everybody, thank you so much for listening. As always, I hope that you engage in the conversation around this episode by using the hashtag HigherEdCMO on Twitter. You can find me there at Jaime Hunt IMC. That's JaimeHunt IMC. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat and have conversations. My goal with this podcast is to help our profession advance and grow and modernize and professionalize, and I'm always happy to talk. So please reach out, and otherwise, be well, and let's go bust some silos.
Hey y'all, Zach here from Enrollify. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO with Jaime Hunt. If you liked this episode, do us a huge favor and hit that follow and subscribe button below. Furthermore, if you've got just 2 minutes to spare, we would greatly appreciate you leaving a rating and a review of this show on Apple Podcasts. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. But Enrollify is far more than just a podcast network. Enrollify is where higher ed comes to learn new marketing skills, discover new products and services, and find their next job. We're a growing, learning community of 4,000 members, and we'd love to welcome you into the fold. You can access our free blog articles, newsletters, e-courses, and more, or purchase our master course on how to market a university with Terry Flannery at enrollify.org. We look forward to meeting you soon and welcoming you into the community. Again, you can subscribe for free at enrollify.org.